This is an unboxing setup of the Porter Cable PCB 330BS 14-inch bandsaw, purchased recently from Lowe's. Comes in a box. It's definitely a two-person carry job after we cut off the straps. We're going to have some staples to pull out. Box lid to cut open. Maybe these staples will come out by hand. Perfect. And perfect. Inside on the edge of the box we find the instruction guide. Please read all instruction manuals for your power tools carefully, as they contain important information on how to keep you safe. Not the least of which is wearing proper safety glasses and eye and ear protection when you're working with any items. As we look on top of the box here, we find a few items. We've got what looks to be edges of the bottom stand. We'll put that aside. Have our handy T-square. We have a bag of hardware. Another part. In each of the corners there's a little rod here that organizes and keeps this all together. And then we have the cast iron table, all nice and neatly wrapped. When this saw was purchased, this was definitely a two-person lift job to get it into my vehicle. The box weighs approximately about 250 pounds, and you may want to have a friend or a buddy help you out. And the next part here of the saw is the actual bandsaw itself. The blade is attached, and the spring tension is in there, and the motor. And it appears like all we have to do is assemble the base, and then we'll mount the saw up on the stand. So we'll assemble the stand and we'll be right back. What I'm working on now is tapping out the holes. What it turned out is that this hole and this hole were not tapped like they were supposed to be. The screws that were included with the bandsaw did not fit in the holes and they were not tapped. I contacted Porter Cable's service number and they directed me to contact a factory authorized service representative. Upon realizing how much work it was going to be to return the rest of the bandsaw, I decided it was going to be just as easy to be able to size up the holes. When I looked at these holes and got out my trusty tap and die set, they appeared to be tappable with an M7 by one thread. And so as I finish up my tap here, I now have two properly tapped holes that I should be able to anchor the trunnion support brace into with the bolts. So then with a trip to the hardware store, I was able to buy the bolts I was looking for, the properly sized bolts to fit the hole that I can then fit the trunnion into, or the trunnion support. And then now with those holes in place, I should be able to fit this here properly like this, and be able to mount that accordingly. On the back, you'll notice on the trunnion support plate, there is a hole here and another hole, a couple places here there's not through holes, so I'll line up the pin here. According to the diagrams, there's supposed to be another pin here that's actually missing on this bandsaw. I'm not particularly sure why, but that's just how it is. So I'm going to line up this pin with this hole here. So that sits like that, and then I should be able to drop in my new bolt and thread that right down like that. Based on size, that's going to be, I can use a 7/16 size head to tap this M7. And to be able to drop the bolt in with the wrench, let me just quickly thread that through with my hands before I get out the wrench. And now we'll put in the other bolt. When I got the bolts, I also purchased lock collars at the hardware store too, just to ensure that these nuts lock in place. The advantage of threading the hole here in the bandsaw is I don't have a bolt here underneath, so this just gets threaded right down. And now with my M7 screws in place, my bolts in place on the bandsaw, now I can begin to think about the next step. The next step of installing the table is going to be put in the level support screw so the trunnion has something to be able to be level against when the table rotates around. One of the other things I need to think about doing is adjusting my blocks on either side so that I could use a feeler gauge to be able to have the proper gap between the guide blocks and the bearings there. I had previously loosened this up here, so let me square this up and then I will get out my feeler gauge. according to the manual, I'm supposed to use a .02 feeler gauge. We'll go with a .2 gauge. We'll see how this works. Now that we've got the support blocks here lined up, we've got the screw in place, now we can start to think about installing our table. Let me just double check the alignment of a couple more things here, then we'll be right back with the installation of our table. For the installation of the table, it goes with the bandsaw. We're going to have to take the bandsaw table here out of its protective case. Note that at the bottom of this table here, the table should be covered in protective grease. You notice there are a couple of bolts here. These form trunnions, and there's also the little knobs that look like this that were also included in the hardware package. These are going to have to come out, as well as the adjustment screw that allows you to put the bandsaw blade actually into the table. Looks like you can adjust that with just a simple 1/2" wrench. That will have to come out in order to actually get that in, and you'll notice there's also a little red plate here. Little protective plate. We're also going to have to remove that. And keep in mind that the one side of this, that's the top, is actually covered in protective grease. We're going to have to install the table. Let me adjust the camera so you guys can see this. With the package here, grease very clearly still visible on the table. We're going to want to sit here and take the table, and if you look underneath it, we're going to have to slide the table here through the slot until that gets around. And then we're going to have to slide our trunnion bolts through and in for the table. Obviously, we're going to have to remove the packing grease. We love the packing grease on here because the packing grease helps us to know that the table is free from rust, since this is cast iron. If there is any moisture in the table, it's subject to periodic rusting, which we don't want. We want our beautiful cast iron surface to be as rust-free as possible. Just to check my alignment here, I'm going to put in the insert plate and check to see how that looks. Based on how I think this insert looks is going to affect how I see the alignment of this table. As you can tell, it looks like the blade is not exactly quite centered. It needs to come back towards the rear of the saw just a little bit farther, so the table needs to extend out just a little bit farther. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is to see if we can adjust the trunnion support brace just a little bit farther out this way. So we'll take the table, pop out the insert here, and then we're going to take the table and we're going to take it off again just by lifting up like this and sliding the blade right through. We'll set that down and we're going to adjust that trunnion mount, and we'll come right back at you again. Okay, we're back after making a few more adjustments to the blade and the trunnion. And now we're going to reinstall the table and see how those adjustments work. We're going to slide the table on just like this. And then we're going to rotate the table. We've got one in, and now let's get the other one in. If anything, that just looks like the table is a little farther on one side than the other. At this point, I'm going to get some towels here and wipe off the packing grease. And we've got this beautiful, shiny surface. We're going to want to protect that. As with all of our cast iron surfaces, it's always important to, whether it's wax or it's Bose shield, or whatever your preference is, that you take a few minutes to make sure that you protect the cast iron surface so that it stays beautiful and shiny like this for years to come. I'm wiping this down now just because I don't want to get it all over myself again later. When I look at this, it'd be my preference if I could get the bandsaw blade to be just a little more closer to center on the support. I'd be able to move this either, I'd be able to move the table further out and away from the inside edge of the bandsaw. I'll have to see if that's possible with these trunnion brackets to do so. So we're going to take it off again and make another adjustment. With a few more adjustments under the table, we were then able to attach the table, slide in the miter gauge. However, you'll notice that I still was not able to square up the blade in the slot with the insert in it. I tried multiple ways of adjusting the trunnion and adjusting the blade guides to no avail. And so we'll just start her up here soon and see how it works. Now to make sure that the blade is square to the bandsaw table, raise that up out of the way and adjust my combination square. And that actually looks pretty good, so I'm pretty happy with that. Combination square and get ready to plug her in. Don't forget to always wear proper eye and ear protection when you're considering the use of any power tool. Make sure you read, know, and understand the instructions in the user's manual, as any power tool in your shop can be dangerous and or deadly. In just a moment, we'll have the first startup of the saw. Now for the first startup of the bandsaw,